What I find is your really good leaders will focus more on the organizational fit, culture fit, and level of commitment with the idea that I can train the skills and experiences to where I need.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by Point Blank Safety Services. These guys are changing the game when you think about security. They are using active duty officers on their off-duty time. Not only giving these officers an additional income, because we all know police officers just aren't paid that well, but they're giving them an off-duty income and using the highest caliber of people to secure our highways, our buildings, and bridges. Check them out at pointblanksafety.com. Hey guys, this is going to be a fun one today. I'm bringing a buddy of mine, Dan Dwyer, on. Man, this guy's just got a killer story. It's one hell of a journey as he just goes through everything that he's been through in life and how he's gotten to where he's at now. So guys, do me a favor, welcome Dan to the show. Dan, thanks for being on here, brother, and share with us your journey, how you got here, all those fun things.
Hey, Donnie, it's a pleasure. My journey, just like everybody's journey, is a unique story. They're unique because they're our own. I was adopted at birth. Myself and my fraternal twin brother, who's a captain in the Navy today, serving in his 34th year.
Wow, 34 years.
Yeah, and the Navy won't force him out until 2022. So what happened is he made chief in like 9 years, and then the following year got picked up as an LDO, as a former Marine. You know what that is? A limited duty officer. So his clock essentially restarted. But I mean, he's obviously been one of the super sailors in his career field. So he's currently the deputy commander for the ship repair facility in Yokosuka. If you followed the news in the past year with those destroyers, he's been pretty busy, in 7th Fleet.
Well, I mean, that's a dude's dude right there.
Right.
To go through it, I mean, that's no joke.
Yeah. But, we were adopted at birth, and then at the age of 4, believe it or not, our mother who adopted us was a nurse in the delivery room.
Oh, wow.
So, that was a great story in itself. But at the age of 4, she passed away. So we were raised by our aunt and uncle. So the military, much like for many people, became a launching pad or a platform for the means to the ends, right? So If you think about what motivates people today, it's either number 1, money, 2, social and emotional reasons, which is really big today, right? Or 3rd, ideological. Clearly, my motivations for spending 22 years in the Army and Dave, still serving in the Navy, were 1, money from the standpoint of educational benefits, right? And then ideological reasons. Growing up in a post-Vietnam era, I graduated from high school in '84, so we're talking Cold War era, and seeing the changes. But the recruiters were top notch at the time, of course, across all the services, because they had some challenges, some post-Vietnam era challenges that they had to negotiate or navigate through. So each of the services were picking their best recruiter. But I knew I always wanted to go to college, but I also knew that it was simply unaffordable. I mean, my aunt and uncle today are 92 and 88 respectively, been married over 67 years. They took us in at a time where their last kids had left the house, so they didn't owe us anything. But the values-based home that they gave us, no matter what I was doing on a Saturday night, my butt was in a pew on Sunday morning, right?
That's awesome.
So 22 years in the Army. I'm married for over 26 years. I have 2 boys.
Good on you.
2 boys serving today. Trust me, I'm not without flaws when it comes to
none of us are, but, in this day and age, that many years and being married. I love telling people, my wife and I, we're on 13 years, but we come from good stock. Both of our parents, to my father-in-law, passed away this last January. But both of our parents, thank you for that, spent 46 years married.
Yeah.
So that's awesome, man. Good on you.
Yeah, it's even more challenging today. So, but we have 2 sons. They both serve in the Army today. Our oldest, 23-year-old, is an Army Ranger, and our youngest is in communications and cyber. So
you couldn't convince any of them to go to the Marine Corps? I mean, come on, man.
No, trust me. People who know Dan Dwyer well know that I bleed purple.
Right.
The only qualifier I gave them was, I'll pay for school, but I'm not going to subsidize stupidity. So if you don't have a plan, that's okay. But much like sports growing up, I played baseball, basketball, football, the traditional 3 growing up in central Indiana. I told my boys, hey, I don't care what sport you play. Just play something so you understand the concept of team. Same thing with military service. I know the pros and cons and benefits of each service and and they're remarkably their own. But, I didn't push the service. Obviously, they grew up on Army bases, in and around Army bases. So actually, my oldest wanted to be a Navy SEAL, but I did tell him there's a lot of risk involved. And the risk, of course, is if you wash out of buds, you're at the needs of the Navy, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Whereas if you go Army infantry, worst case, you're an airborne infantryman and not a Ranger. But he's answered every call the Army's asked of him. Infantry training, airborne training, RASP. He's in his second of 2 Ranger battalions already at the age of 23. Went straight through Ranger school. Of course, a lot of luck is involved there, but EIB, multiple deployments, obviously, given the op tempo.
Well, and I bust the chops of all the other services, but that's just a stud. They can go through all that and keep progressing forward. That's badass at its finest.
Well, and growing up in Colorado served him well. Obviously, you start your day every day at 6,000 feet, but he was a wrestler in high school.
Right.
I grew up in the same hometown as John Wooden in Central Indiana. I wasn't going to be wrestling.
Right.
Basketball. Childhood friend with Steve Alford, who's currently the UCLA coach now. So I'm proud of both of them. They've accomplished every milestone that's been put in front of them so far, but I know that there's many more. So
yeah, well, but they come from good stock, man. We did read through your bio in here, but I know a lot of people will read your bio before you get on here. But dude, you've got some pretty good accolades behind you as well, some awards you've won, and just some things you accomplished in life. Walk us through some of your 22 years and just some of the cool things you accomplished during that time.
Yeah, so I said I enlisted first. I've been on a couple shows. I've actually transitioned twice. The first 4 years in the Army, I wanted to do something that kind of stretched the area between my ears. So I was in military intelligence. Specifically, I was a crypt analyst, code breaker, and back then everything was largely manual, not as digitized today. Plus, I knew I wanted to get a clearance.
They recently just had the movie come out about the 4 ladies that wrote the code for the shuttle going to the moon.
Yeah.
And they called them, basically human computers. That was before your time, but was it a similar process?
Similar from the standpoint, the Puzzle Palace at National Security Agency Fort Meade. A lot of countries were still using, manual
human computers.
Yeah, human codes, right? So, and enlisting in the Army in '84, I already felt that I was behind my peers. So during that 4 years, 84 to 88, I knocked out 2 years of college. And those were the times where there was no online opportunities. Your butt was in a seat every night and you were studying instead of drinking at night. So there were some sacrifices, but I think that really grounded me to future years, right? So I got out, went to Indiana University. I was there for 2 years, obviously, commissioned through ROTC. Knew that I didn't want to go into military intelligence because of the inverted pyramid in terms of growth and opportunities to lead soldiers. So I went into combat arms, specifically armor and cavalry, and then spent the remainder of my time with your traditional assignments, 4 years as a platoon leader, years in XO, not 4 years as a platoon leader. I would have been out of the Army by then, but a year as a platoon leader, years in XO, years as scout platoon leader, years as battalion maintenance officer, and then the field grades assignments, S3, XO, deputy commander to HR McMaster, who retired last Friday. All the requisite assignments from organizations from, 16-man platoon to the 5,200-man regiment. So I know one of your questions is, would you do anything different? And my answer is resoundingly no, because I took a route that I needed to go, but I learned so much along the way. And I think people stay in uniform today because of their leadership being the silver bullet in life. And fortunately, I had some great leaders that I worked for, that I was able to observe in their natural habitat, identify those things that I wanted to emulate and copy and use later, versus those things I certainly didn't want to use. So that was in uniform. Out of uniform, one of the first things I was asked to do is to serve as a military strategist based upon my experiences in Iraq, planning and leading successful counterinsurgency area security operations. So the organization was the American Enterprise Institute, who was looking to provide an alternative to what our uniformed senior leaders knew what we needed to do to change the way we were conducting combat operations in 2006. It's just that the Secretary of Defense wasn't listening to them. At the time, President Bush was telling the American people, I'm going to change the strategy. from the way we've been conducting business from 03 to 06, and I'm going to announce that new strategy by the end of the year. Well, the AEI work caused the president to go back on television and tell his people he's going to release this new strategy after the new year. So we briefed in December 28th, my 41st birthday, that plan was briefed to him. And then, of course, the rest is history. But I did that largely for ideological reasons. Obviously, you lose relevancy the day you take off the uniform, but I still had an idea what right looked like. So that was great work. I've done similar work up to until, about 15 months ago, where we did a similar project on Yemen, and you're starting to see the results of that now. We've really left Yemen alone since the USS Cole incident in 2008 that you probably remember. But
yep.
Once I finished that, I got into what I really wanted to do, and that was coaching in the areas of leadership development, management development, performance improvement, and business development. I knew I was always passionate about leadership, all my studies, academia, and then, of course, growing up in the best leadership laboratory possible in our services. The business acumen was something that just grew to me, and because I, like you, identified a need. No matter how much energy, drive, and initiative our warfighters have when they take off the uniform, unless you had a very unique job in the military, that business acumen is not always there. And no one more than I want veteran entrepreneurs to be successful after they take off the uniform. So part of Vet to Biz Life, of course, is to reverse the trend of 9 out of 10 startups failing. Now, Vet to Biz Life is only about a year old. It really is a niched continuation of a pre-existing coaching business. Taking off the uniform in 2006 allowed me to work with some companies that were having some challenges during the economic recession times of 2007, 2008. One of the first things they do is they'd strip their internal organic professional development capabilities that typically fell under their HR function. So I took advantage of those opportunities. I wanted to develop a pretty good knowledge base of what's going on, both in public, private sectors, but specifically corporate America, before I felt that I could provide greater value to the veterans, right? Because I work in both spaces. This will be the third year. I'll be the principal facilitator for the development of the Secretary of the Air Force's staff. So when I go into a workplace like that, they always want to know corporate examples, real world examples. The opposite is true in corporate America, right? They always want to know what works best in government. Why is Department of Defense different than the way we lead and conduct daily operations? So,
well, and I want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because luckily I get the privilege of bringing a lot of veterans on the show.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a lot of friends in that arena, being a Marine myself, but a lot of things that comes up a ton of time is that transition, right? Is going from uniform on to uniform off. And I don't care if you did 4 years. I don't care if you did 40 years.
Right.
They just retired the longest serving Marine in history, and he did like 42 years in the Corps.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. But talk to me a little bit about that transition. Specifically, do you think the military prepared you to go from military life to civilian life and that transitional phase? Were you ready to go from the structured world to what I consider more of an unstructured world?
Yeah, I think I was. I think I was. As a retiree versus a first term or midterm service member transitioning, there's a difference in terms of resources, right? However, when I took off the uniform, I always felt that the Army and I were all square. I earned good wages for my performance, great medical benefits, a decent pension. So I've always felt that the Army owes me nothing, nor am I entitled of anything else, right?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. All said, I'm a firm believer in being resourceful as well. One area where service members can be resourceful is in the accumulation of their accrued leave, right? Before they decide to take off the uniform. Although deployments and war helped me to do so, I had 90 days of terminal leave saved up.
Oh, you even beat me. That's a rare. I did 72.
Yeah.
I stacked them up, and I remember I almost screwed it up, Dan, I walk up to my lieutenant and I'm like, hey, thank you so much for signing off on my 72 days terminal leave. And he looks right at me and he's like, I can't do that. I'm like, I meant 60, because in the Marine Corps, you weren't allowed at that time, you weren't allowed to take over 60 days of terminal leave.
but I had a staff sergeant who really wanted me out of his hair.
Sure.
So he signed off on it. But
that's the right approach. I mean, you reach a decision point, and if you decide to take off the uniform, you're still on the rolls. They want you out of there as soon as possible. So Donnie Boivin's replacement can be in there, and we can train him, develop him, and and deploy him. Right. So I get that. But the thing is as you're transitioning, what that means is you may have to tell family members that you can't come home over the holidays, right?
Right.
You may have sacrifices, but if your plan is to take off the uniform and transition, they'll understand that, and you'll create more margin for both finding a job, be better resourced, and unless you're transitioning to a government service job, in many cases, you may be able to double dip while starting your new life. I don't need an organization like the Army to provide me structure, routine, and accountability. I learned from my time in the military, and I know you did as well, that we can do this personally, through our personal habits and, remove those dependencies of others, right? Admittedly, I'm better at structure, routine, and accountability today because of my military service, but I never looked for another organization to replace what the Army provided without, while out of uniform.
Right. And I love your approach because I think there's some flaws still in the military helping people transition out, but I don't blame the military as a whole for helping these guys transition because 90% of the problem is the person themselves doing the transition.
Right.
I think a lot of people went into the military because they didn't know what the hell they wanted to do. So they took that route and then they got out of the military still not knowing what the hell they wanted to do.
Right.
But almost had that entitled thought process of, well, because I served, you need to do X for me. I had a little bit of that when I got out. I thought when I got out that the world would come singing to me and would welcome me with open arms because I served my country. And it took me years to figure out that, dude, being a Marine was nothing but a plug on my resume in the corporate world. It's not equivalent to a 4-year degree. It's not equivalent to job experience.
Right.
It's just an absolute stunt. But once I wrapped my head around that, life got a lot easier.
And we've created that too. Much like I refused to, once I learned what I needed to know about the millennial generation that I work with every day, I refused to read anything anymore about them because, and I tell them, that if anybody in a multi-generational workplace pushes back on you and starts talking about all these myths related to the millennials, you tell them it's your fault.
Yeah, absolutely.
You tell those X-Geners and those boomers it's your fault. Same thing with our transitioning veterans. If some of those who feel entitled, it's because we've created those conditions, right?
Absolutely.
As a society. But I will tell you that the most successful transitioning veterans don't feel that way. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing about millennials, and I love this, Dr. Stevie Don walked me through this one day, is she does a lot of training for corporations and working with millennials. And one of the things she says is, dude, look, you can't get mad at these kids because all they're doing is living a lifestyle you wish you lived. Right. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, they go to work when they want to. They get off work when they want to. They have fun. And their work schedule in their mind may not be your 8 to 5 strategy. It may be the midnight, the 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is. And part of it is just embracing that lifestyle. And once she got me to understand that, and the second thing behind just putting it out there is for a lot of these people, this is their first job. And a lot of us growing up, our first job was, for me, it was working at a catfish restaurant as a busboy at 14 years old, but for a lot of these people, this was their first job. So there is some educational and coaching on it, but dude, they're phenomenal workers. They're absolute badasses if you know how to work with them.
Yeah, they're no different than any other generation. They're
absolutely
valued in the workplace. The difference is long gone are the days where people like myself join an organization, plan on staying there 20 or 30 years.
Absolutely.
Unless you onboard them properly, develop them, value them, foster a culture of recognition because that's how they've grown up, and you'll retain quality people. What makes it challenging for whether you're a parent or a military leader today is it's the first generation that stopped looking towards authority for information, right?
Right.
Yeah.
100%. That's a great way of putting it, yeah.
That doesn't bode well for traditional hierarchical organizations, but the topic that I have with a lot of senior leaders now, both in corporate America, public-private sectors, is to train to or develop collaborative leaders in their organizations.
I think also along those lines, if they'll just embrace, okay, cool, we got them for 2 years.
Yep.
Well, let's get the best 2 years out of them we can freaking get out of them.
Yeah.
Let's groom them. I think it's Gary Vaynerchuk that talks about it a lot in his loudmouth ways, but he talks about, I would rather groom somebody so they go somewhere else and help them get to that next place.
Yep.
Because if that place doesn't work out, they're going to remember and have gratitude for what they've done and come back, to me. And I'm okay with that. And I love that thought process. So talk to me about Vet to Biz Life, because this is a cool program. Something you built this whole thing by yourself, didn't you? Or is it just
absolutely.
Okay. Walk us through Vet to Biz Life. It's a cool thing.
I'm a big fan of niching down, right? And like I said, it was very intentional over the 10 plus years. I've worked with a lot of organizations on those areas that I spoke of earlier: leadership development, management development, performance improvement, business development. I also recognized that I was at a point and we go through different seasons in life, right?
Absolutely.
Especially business seasons of life, where I wanted to pay it forward more. And the best way I could do that is to work with veteran entrepreneurs. Notice I didn't say transitioning veterans, even though I am doing some work for transitioning veterans. I realize that space is pretty saturated right now, and there's people doing great work in that area. But specifically niche into those who have decided that when they transition, they don't want to work for anybody but themselves. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be small business owners. But yet, no matter how much they have that want, there's still some gaps that they've got to close. And I'm all about their success. So much like previous coaching consulting, the services I provide with Vet to Biz Life are coaching consulting in those areas that I spoke of. With the transition vet, I really want to, depending on that individual's experiences, continue to build their leadership skills, right? No fault of their own, but depending on what jobs they had, experiences and immersion they had in the military, they may have capped out at a specific leadership level. However, if they're going to lead and run a successful business today, they really have to continue to invest themselves in that regard, but also the business acumen development, right? So
absolutely. So
coaching, consulting, speaking, I speak regularly to different audiences. I'm all about closing that civilian military gap too.
Yeah. Well, and it's a huge gap. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the entrepreneur thing, because I have a lot of entrepreneurs that come on the podcast, and people really seem to like those episodes. But there's a huge myth, I think, around entrepreneurism. And I've started throwing around that entrepreneurs become the new MLM. And what I mean by that is people are buying into this thought process of, I can be a millionaire, I can set my own hours, I can do all these great things, and they're not thinking about the hours that you're going to put in, the time you're going to put in, the discipline it's going to take to run a business. Right. I mean, there are some of those luxuries that come with it, but the best way I heard it put is you can work anytime you want to. You just pick the 80 or 90 hours that you want to put in, and that's sure, right. you can work it all. Talk a little bit about just entrepreneurism in general and what it really takes somebody the abilities and skills they have to be successful in that world.
You've hinted on it yourself there, and that is you've got to be able to lead yourself before you can lead a business. And it's not a 40-hour week endeavor.
No,
it's not. You are constantly investing time in your business. Rituals are important. I tell you what, if you didn't leave the military with time management skills, you're going to be challenged as an entrepreneur. You've got to have that morning ritual, that evening ritual, that first hour of each workday startup ritual, that last hour of workday startup ritual, whenever that is, if you weren't very good at communicating to your spouse and family what you did when you were in the military for operational security reasons or whatever the case, you cannot do that as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
One of the reasons why I took off the uniform at a time where I was still having a very successful military career is I wanted to make sure I always defined success as not the rank or position I attained, but leaving with what I came in with, right? So same rules apply in entrepreneurship. You're going to dedicate and work a lot of hours, and even more if you're not good at your own time management skills. You just got to figure out when those hours are, right?
For me, the entrepreneur is you're 1 foot on crazy, right? You're 1 foot on business acumen, and then for me, I think every entrepreneur has to be a salesman first.
That's right.
So no matter what you have or what you're working towards, in your program, Vet to Biz Life, are you focused and are you narrowed down in the aspect of running a business, time management? I mean, what's the program's outcome or goal if somebody going through it?
Yeah. So what's unique about my program is I don't cookie cutter approach anything. I coach and consult based upon the needs of that individual, right? It's just a more fulfilling experience if I can answer their needs versus be very directive and tell them what I think they should be doing, right? But you're right. And when it comes to veteran entrepreneurs, the challenges of starting as a vetrapreneur, if you will, that's a term that's really become common, is that turn into business owners and they face challenges like funding, in the military, you were given a budget and you operated within the confines of that budget. And typically, if you were very creative, you did well. I'm an advocate of bootstrapping your own business.
Hell yeah.
I do not want veteran entrepreneurs to go out and get a bunch of loans. If that means you take a marathon approach instead of a sprint approach, that's another challenge is, we create the conditions where a lot of people want instant gratification or rewards. And in entrepreneurship, it just doesn't come that quickly.
And back to Gary Vee, it's one of the things I love that he preaches is patience.
Right.
People are so influenced in this day and age by these loudmouth, bling-toting, car-toting, people that are selling their courses and their trainings and this, that, and the other about, how to get to instant richness. And it's my belief that entrepreneurism is really the tortoise and the hare, and you better be the tortoise, with moving forward with the program, because it's a challenge. And for me, and I don't tell people, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm a business owner. The difference being is an entrepreneur is someone who's going to constantly come up with multiple ideas and multiple thought processes, and they're always trying to build that next thing.
Right.
All the way through. What are some of the challenges you see from the veteran world as they transition into being a vetrepreneur? Because some skills absolutely transition over to being an entrepreneur, some don't. So what are some of the biggest challenges they stack up against as they try and create their outside of funding, which is always number one?
Yeah.
A lot of people stack up against.
In many cases, they haven't answered the questions, if entrepreneurship is for them, questions like, do they enjoy taking risks, right? Questions like, do they like working hard on projects that interest them? I mean, you have to be passionate about the solution to the problem, to somebody's pain point that you're answering in your value proposition, right? Do you have, high level of energy and commitment, as we were talking about, to dedicate the requisite number of hours to be successful? Do you want to achieve results based largely on your own efforts, Because you can call it entrepreneurship, but what I see with a lot of veterans is it's solopreneurship starting out until they realize that they can't do it all themselves and do it effectively. Are they creative? Do they have project management skills? These are all questions that they've got to answer. But one of the challenges, to get to your question, is the removal of fear and self-doubt is huge when it comes to being successful as an entrepreneur. Those who can't are typically the ones who quit. They're part of that 9 out of 10 of startups that fail.
Well, I think you bring a huge point, because one thing, I have a belief that you never fail, you quit.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. But I think that people don't know, the ones who do quit don't know what they're getting into in the first place.
Right.
And I love, and I'm going to keep going back on Gary Vee. I've been listening to him a lot lately, but one of the things he's started to change is, instead of preaching that you should be an entrepreneur, is you may be okay being a number two.
Right.
Versus trying to jump out into that world. And that's where the one foot on crazy comes from me, is you got to really not give a shit whether you live or die. To quote a great movie that I love, is part of being an entrepreneur through the process and being absolutely successful. For you, why this route? Why working with veterans? I mean, you've had a ridiculously awesome military career that you're very humble about, by the way, and have had some great successful things. Why now are you so focused on working with these veterans and help them obtain successful businesses and the like?
I shared with you what, the three things that typically motivate people: money, social, emotional, and ideological. For me, working with veterans is really an ideological reason. The reason why I can offer free coaching and consulting services to veteran entrepreneurs because I have alternative sources of income, right? I am very sensitive to and have a developed understanding of the financial challenges of our veterans in starting their own businesses. And I will be the last to try to take their money away unnecessarily. Coaching contracts, Today, I won't enter a coaching contract that's longer than 6 months in duration, because if I do my job as a coach, then they're going to be successful. And I don't need to drag it out for a year or 3 years and just suck money out of, especially veterans. Typically what I'll do around that 5th month is have a conversation and determine one of three things. One, if all the goals and objectives have not been met, we mutually decide to keep the coaching consulting relationship. Or two, I dump them because their level of commitment doesn't mirror mine. And that happens, right? Because if I'm dedicating time towards you, somebody else isn't getting that level of effort. And then third, and I still do this with every one of my previous coaching clients, is I transition a fee-based, task-based coaching relationship to an absolutely free mentoring relationship, right? So I remain responsive to them as an enduring solution, of course, at no charge. Anytime they want to do an asthma check, bounce an idea, those are some of the things that we want from our mentors in our life. But with these veterans, I encourage them to go with what military service may have given you a solid foundation in a variety of fields, from computers, technologies to communications, healthcare, operations, and engineering. I'm a big advocate of following your passions in life and as early in life as possible instead of doing what you have to do, right? But all said, they have to know their strengths and weaknesses, and they need to seek advice from experts in specific fields.
No, and you're spot on. I would throw in their humility.
Yep.
Along with that, and then a dash of self-awareness on top of it. To your point, if you don't play to your strengths, you're going to be playing behind the 8 ball.
Right.
I love all the people of the time that are now telling you, okay, specifically outsource the things you're not good at. And it's what I just literally did today, is outsource all the editing of this podcast because it was consuming so much time. I enjoy the front end and talking to people, but doing all the editing was killing me. So along those lines, but it's understanding those processes and be willing to that. Are all your programs for veterans free? I don't think I knew that.
Not all of them. No.
Okay.
No, and it depends on the scope, right? If you want to come on a call because something is scratching your itch or you need some results, I'm not going to charge you for that call.
Right.
However, if you've got some significant needs, depending on where you are in your business season of life, then we'll probably enter some sort of coaching agreement. Now, what I've done recently is, because my coaching was sort of capped out, I started a mastermind group, a very affordable alternative for one-on-one coaching. We're talking $49 a month.
Oh, nice.
And what's key in this mastermind group is I don't drive the material. The group does. So in a closed Facebook group, I keep a running poll going, and whatever's at the top of that poll is their greatest need. That's what we cover that month.
Oh, that's huge.
And then I'll scratch that off and then, work it down. So the members, and I keep the group small, 12 to 15 people. I like to tell people there were 12 disciples for a reason, right? Yeah. but most importantly, by keeping it small, they can feel like their needs are being met. They have a voice that can be heard, and they just get more, I want it to be a more fulfilling experience, and that's working well. But, no, it's totally dependent on the amount of time that's necessary. I'm no different than anybody else. I value my time, but when it comes to veterans, I don't charge them as much as I do, organizations like Coors or Otterbox or,
Right.
Somebody else. So,
I'm a coach myself, you know that.
Yeah.
But I'm a firm believer in everybody needs a coach. How does somebody know that they're ready for you and your level of coaching, your skill set, this, that, and the other? I think it's a huge process for somebody to go through to actually pick a coach. And I tell everybody, you better be vetting that coach as much as they should be vetting you, to go forward with some sort of coaching program, because in no world is coaching a one size fit all, type thing. So how does somebody know that they're ready for your level of coaching and to move them or their business forward?
Well, I think it starts first, Donnie, with self-awareness. Trust me, there are leaders at the highest levels of organizations that need coaching but won't admit to it.
That's where the humility comes into play, right?
Yeah. And the greatest example I give is, I'll go into organizations and senior leaders will not be doing any succession planning, right? Meaning they have no exit strategy later on in the maturity of the organization. Typically that tells me if they're not good at succession planning, that's something we learned in paragraph 5 of every operations order, right? If Donnie dies, Dan's in charge. Oh my God. If Dan dies, somebody else is in charge. But typically that there's a direct relationship between the lack of succession planning and individual development within that organization. But to get to your question, your ability to think clearly, make sound decisions, and grow as a leader or manager, entrepreneur is critical to your success. Once they realize that, they realize or come to the conclusion that having a trusted advisor and personal coach who can offer them different ideas and perspectives for them and their organization can help them maximize both their own performance, but the demonstrated potential for themselves and their organization. Like I said, my coaching is specifically for individuals who are committed to dramatically transforming the way they lead and the way their organizations perform. And it starts with that self-awareness. And, through powerful conversations, lives and organizations change. We know that.
Absolutely. I love asking everybody as, I'm a firm believer we're all on this journey, and everything along this journey is stacked up to teach us something, some sort of life value or lesson. But sometimes those lessons hurt more than others.
Yeah.
Walk us through at least one time in your life where either a wrong choice, a wrong decision, a screw up, something happened that dramatically taught you one of the greatest life lessons that you've learned along the process and helped shape or form you into the level of the person you are now, the coaching you are now, and it's helped you shape the future of you and your business.
Yeah. I told you my story early on. So I'm a firm believer, and I haven't always thought this, but I certainly believe it now, that our true legacy in life is our family, not our job or our vacation, right? I've developed this mindset through reflection and failure. Failing as a husband, failing as a parent. There were too many instances to count when I placed my own interests in front of others, or I was chasing what I wanted while my, wife and sons sacrificed. Guilty perhaps of having an undisciplined pursuit for more, professionally, versus a disciplined pursuit for less. So through consistent priority management of myself, I found that you can have what you call work-life integration or balance and prioritize things in proper order. We've all seen it. I've seen some of the very best senior leaders in and out of uniform that once they transition, there's not much to account for with respect to family. So I have the same approach towards our veteran audience. I took off the uniform in 2006, so it took me up until last year, right? 2017. We're talking 10, 11 years before I made a commitment to start paying forward or give back to that audience that I left, right? And it's no different than a lot of transitioning vets.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm the same story as I tell you. It was 10 years before I started giving back to the veteran community and maybe a little beyond that. But for my story is my first 10 years out. I didn't even tell anybody I was a veteran. Don't know this about me, Dan. But when I was working in St. Louis, I actually had a senior executive tell me two things. He said, one, don't tell people you're a veteran. It won't help you in your career. And the second thing he told me was to lose my accent. Can't say y'all. You can't have any twang, because you won't go through the rungs. As a young guy, not long removed from the military, that was a huge implant into me that there's no value in being a veteran. So I went through a lot of years where I didn't tell anybody that I even served. So now, through some old introspective and everything else, I'm doing a similar story and trying to get back to as many veterans as possible.
Yeah, trust me, I love veterans, love working with them, but in some cases I do the same thing. I don't have any retired Army stickers on my car or cars or anything like that, but you don't have to. It's who you serve. And going back to your earlier question, when it comes to coaching, I'm just a firm believer that when there's no set curriculum, you and your team are the material. This approach allows us to get to the source of why individuals and organizations often fail to achieve what matters most, right? So my program is in really my speaking, and I work with individuals who say what it is they're going to do and then do it, right? But you've got to, and this is a big challenge for most. You've got to be willing to alter your behaviors and actions in order to get the personal and professional results you desire. I'm sure you're finding that with your own clients as well. You know, I'm not a life coach. I tell people that. And I would never be presumptuous to think that I could guide you on all matters in your life. I have trouble guiding myself in those regards, but rather I focus all of my energy, drive, and initiative on coaching leaders and organizations to gain great clarity and development, you know, to improve performance.
Absolutely. You know, my joke is, I'm not a life coach. I'm a success coach. And the reason I went that route is I don't give a damn about your life. I just want you to be successful in it.
Right.
You know, with any coaching, you're going to cross the chasm of dealing with personal things to dealing with business things, because as you alluded to earlier, if you don't have that balance in home life, work life's going to absolutely suffer. What would you tell somebody, though, that's on that same trajectory and path, that they are the over-the-top, success-oriented individual that may have sacrificed the home life, the family life, to achieve a certain level of self-perceived success? What would you tell them to, I mean, I don't know if rethink the strategy is the right thing, but to have the reflection that you've had over your career and make the choices you've made?
Well, sometimes it's just a matter of something as simple as telling them to take an appetite suppressant, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, make hay slowly. You know, as you transition from, you know, solopreneur to building a team around you, you know, I encourage them that they invest in their own leadership skills, specifically their visionary leadership and team building skills. Because unless you had a more senior position in the military, you may have not been that visionary leader, but you certainly have to be the visionary leader to be a successful entrepreneur. You know, leadership is both learned and innate, you know, and I kind of hinted on it earlier, but the best way to learn at leadership, that if you've never been immersed in the operational and strategic levels of business or an organization, in many instances, it's not your fault. You know, much of what you need to do to develop high-performing teams and retain quality people starts with how you invest in yourself. So what I encourage entrepreneurs to do is to pick one thing each week, learn it, and then move on to the next. And what you've got to develop is an understanding of, in your business, what are those things I have to master? And that's a small number of tasks. What are those things that I have to know, which is a larger number of tasks? And then what are those things that I just simply have to have a working familiarization for my organization to be successful or understand, right? If you break it down that way in terms of master, know, understand, I think it just comes to you a lot easier. If my business is going to be successful, I absolutely have to be able to master these tasks or have somebody on my team to master these tasks. So, you know, that gets into growing your team and hiring people, right? What I found in working with multiple organizations is that the three variables in play are organizational fit or cultural fit, level of commitment, and skill levels. What I find is your really good leaders will focus more on the organizational fit, culture fit, and level of commitment with the idea that I can train the skills and experiences to where I need. The poor leaders will just take the opposite approach and focus like a laser beam on the skills and experiences that they need. And consequently, days, weeks, months go by and other team members are coming to them and saying, hey, why'd you hire this guy or gal? You know, they're not committed. They don't fit in well to the organization. But what's really important with respect to what I shared with you about the master, know, understand is keep a running skills assessment in your organization of who can do what. It doesn't do you well to surround yourself with people that all have the same skills, but identify those gaps and use those gaps to hire people. A lot of organizations don't look at that way, but identify those gaps and use your hiring processes to fill those gaps.
And the only thing I'm going to add on to that, and you're spot on, is have the different personalities on your team as well.
Right.
You know, not just the skills, but the different personalities, because you don't want a bunch of you working for you.
That's right.
Because it'll never work. You either get too many chiefs in the shop or you'll get too many alphas and no doers, and you've got to have a solid combination of every personality type in there and be able to manage to all those expectations.
Right.
You're doing a ton of speaking out there, and you're really trying to build awareness not only for your programs, but for your brand and everything else. Talk to us a little bit about your speaking. Where do you speak at? What do you speak on, and those type of things?
Yeah. So one of my non-negotiable goals for 2018 is to connect more locally. And when I say locally, in Colorado Springs, over the last 10 plus years, I've been traveling extensively, working with different organizations. And I found that I know and have invested my time in a lot of other cities other than my own, right? Whether it's speaking, coaching, consulting, whatever the case. So I've started to focus more locally, as well as some of the pre-existing speaking relationships that I've had in the past. So when it comes to identifying a speaker, it's no trivial task to take lightly. Shared leadership and or organizational experiences, can be memorable. You can do much more with a memorable message that might shape you, your leaders, or your organization than you can a memorable meal, if you will, that is consumed, digested, and eventually goes away. So you likely don't want to put just any speaker in front of your audience. So before I commit to any keynote speaking engagement, we have to determine if I am a good fit for the event or the group. I'm very intentional about that. I'm available to speak on a limited basis, but I try to speak at least once a month somewhere. So as you think about what you want in your keynote or motivational speaker, here are, a few things about me. My passion for performance allows me to coach with a laser beam, focus on develop leaders and organizations through the process of, building rapport, detailed assessment, honest feedback, deliberate planning, clear implementation, concise evaluation. My passion for coaching others to perform comes from having the great pleasure and privilege of serving and leading many of our nation's men and women for over 20 years in one of our society's most diverse and demanding workplaces, the United States Army. My passion for coaching includes guiding people who guide others in a way that puts them in a path of realizing their absolute fullest potential. These are the things I talk about. So if you're interested in learning more about having, me speak at your meeting, your conferences, events, I'll certainly entertain the idea. Now, and I shared with you some of the things that are coming up, right? No matter when this airs, I'll just share these things to kind of give you an idea of what I'm doing. Many of the people know that Syracuse University has some great programs. One of them is here in Colorado Springs, specifically at Fort Carson, Onward to Opportunity, which is for transitioning veterans. They don't talk a lot about entrepreneurship, though, so I'm going to go and facilitate a veteran entrepreneurship seminar for that group, for those who want to work for themselves or perhaps might be entertaining the idea of being a veteran entrepreneur. I'll also speak the same week on something totally unrelated. It's Strategic Drink and Think, sponsored by the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. And it's at a veteran-owned brewery in Colorado Springs, Red Lake Brewery. We're going to talk about the planning, preparing, and execution and my involvement in the surge plan, that occurred in 07. I also have tied into local schools, Pikes Peak Community College and the University of Colorado Springs, in which I'm going in talking to a management operations course and a graduate level leadership and ethics course, two different schools, but it's going to be on topics like strategic problem solving and decision making, collaborative leadership. There's an organization in Colorado Springs also that focuses on transitioning veterans, and they're very good at resume building as well as, talking them through the interview processes, but they don't have a gap that they recognized was they don't have any material for entrepreneurship. So I'm going to facilitate a veteran entrepreneurship seminar there. And then lastly, towards the end of June, I'm going to facilitate a strategic leadership seminar for United States Special Operations Command at MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, Florida. So I'm all over the map, but it's intentional because, I have that balance of of public and private organizations that I try to keep. And I do that because, the budgetary considerations in government are not always consistent, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I love about you, Bud. Is you've got such a skill set, such an arsenal behind you, and you bring such a diverse toolkit to the table. It's really, really impressive. This is how I like end up all the shows, man, and I've really appreciated having you on here. Is if you could leave my audience with a thought, a phrase, something they could put in their toolkit to take with them on the rest of their journey, what would be that thing that you would want them to have and harness that they could use as they continue through?
If I could go back, 6 months from getting out of uniform, if there's 3 things that I would execute to fulfill on my transition mission, the first thing would be build a solid LinkedIn presence, right? LinkedIn came about in 2003. I spent 2003 to 2006 in Iraq, so LinkedIn was the last thing I was concerned about. But I've closed that gap recently. In fact, I cultivate a lot of business really using LinkedIn, more so than I do with Facebook and other mediums. But use it to connect with people while telling them what you want to do next. That's one of the greatest challenges our veterans have. You'll go in and read their profile and they'll just say that they're transitioning, right? But they don't always say what they want to do, or they don't reach out to those who they've served with in the past. They're not mind readers. Today, it's clearly who knows you, not who you know.
Right.
And if you're really good at laying out your afterlife objectives, if you will, then you're going to be successful. But the majority of today's service members are not on LinkedIn. Long gone are the days where people can submit a digital resume and expect a lot of action. If I'm interested in Donnie Boivin, I'm going to go to LinkedIn. I'm going to look at his first connections. I'll talk to those first connections about Donnie before I even have a conversation with Donnie.
Absolutely.
That's why government, human capital management is broke, because USA Jobs, are you kidding me? I mean, we're losing quality every day, no matter the department. DOD, Department of State, whatever the case, because of the antiquated employment processes. The other thing is be a realist, and you kind of hinted on this, that your first opportunity out of uniform may not be the be-all, end-all job, right? If you've not saved money or have the benefit of a retirement paycheck, you may have to start out in an entry-level position or take a job that serves as a bridging opportunity to doing what you really want to do. And that's okay. For those of you who are connected with me on social media, you know that I often post social images and quotes, and one of them recently was, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. Now, that's attributed to both Charles Swindoll and Lou Holtz, a former Notre Dame coach, but it's so true. You can live a very successful life and transition well with a positive attitude. The third thing is just have a plan. Have a plan in everything you do in life. But if it's, using your education benefits and going to school, then that's pretty well defined. But if it's transitioning out of the military and becoming a full-time student, then you've got a plan. I used to spend a lot of time walking around. I was the leader who was always walking around, building relationships, rapport, and asking questions. And I would have career-related questions with my soldiers. I wouldn't be only interested in, what keeps you busy outside the workplace, but, what do you want to do next? And I wouldn't ask those questions just because I was, so naive to think that they wanted to mirror, my career path, but I would ask those questions because I could identify how I could support them best. And I'm not so sure that those sort of career conversations occur as much today in 2018, given our nation's longest war, 2002 Afghanistan, 2003 Iraq, but they need to happen. And that's just another reason why, for ideological reasons, I focus on veterans too. But just have a plan. If it's not school, have a plan that involves something other than moving back home and sitting on the couch, right? I mean, you had a great episode today that talked about your Fort Worth travels and then up to St. Louis and back to Fort Worth. But I know that you're a better person because of those experiences.
Absolutely.
We all are, and that's okay. But I always told my officers and non-commissioned officers that whether our teammates, serve one day enlistment or 20 years in uniform, we have a responsibility to give back to society, decent citizens. That's what your success program is all about. I know.
Absolutely, brother. You know, Dan, I got to tell you, man, it's been absolutely a pleasure having you on the show, man. Thanks for taking us on your journey with us. I truly appreciate your humility and how humble you are about your life experiences. I can't help but think that I would brag a little bit more if I'd accomplished some of the things you've accomplished in life, brother. So good on you, man. How do people get in touch with you if they want to engage you for speaking engagement or coaching engagements? What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
They can get a hold of me on Facebook, of course. Dan Dwyer. On LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram. They can email me at dan@vet2bizlife.com. The social media mediums are primarily LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Of course, Vet2Biz is my website. Like you, I have a podcast where each week I interview the most inspiring veteran entrepreneurs. And I share their stories, their experiences, successes, and challenges, to improve the personal and business lives of others. I intentionally don't take any sponsors for that podcast because I don't want to take time away from my guests. But this veteran entrepreneurship doesn't have to all be discovery learning. And I know that there's plenty of opportunity for learning, and there's plenty of opportunity to share the same space. So that's my approach.
Absolutely, brother, and I truly appreciate it. Man, Dan, thanks again, dude, for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Thanks for you do for the veteran community. We need more guys helping us knucklehead butts out as we continue on all of our journeys, man. I just humbled to have you on the show, brother, and I appreciate everything you do.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Donnie. Best wishes to your show and everything that you take on in life.
Thanks, brother. Hey guys, seriously, thanks for listening to this badass episode. I love doing these. I love to hear people's stories and journeys, but what I love most is if you can comment, if you share, if you can tell your friends about this podcast, that would mean everything to me.